Welcome to episode negative 2 of Successful Demo. In each episode, we analyze the theoretical and practical aspects of one or more existing cards. Today, we'll be looking at the Jinteki card from Mumbat Cycle, Raman Rai. This is an interesting card. I did not expect to see it as a suggestion from one of my patrons at all, but here it is. Now, let's give a quick introduction to the card. For those of you less familiar with it, it is an alliance card, which means it costs no influence to play out a faction, provided you are running 6 or more Jinteki cards in your deck already. This is a recursion card. It allows you to effectively fetch cards from archives into your hand. However, for most intents and purposes, it is weaker than the recursion card Archive Memories, which comes from the core set. Now, Archive Memories cost less influence, assuming you're not leveraging on the alliance benefit of Raman Rai, so it's more flexible. Whereas with Raman Rai, you kind of have to deck build in order to, import it for no influence, or you have to play it in the Jinteki faction. And even if you satisfy either of those requirements, it is still less reliable than Archive Memories because it can be trashed, and you need to actually draw a card of the same type as the card that you're about to swap from the bin. Because of that restriction, Raman Rai is unreliable. Even when you draw it, even when you install it, you can't guarantee that you will be able to get the card from archives into your hand that you're looking for. Just like Archive Memories, it also costs you a click to do so. You have to spend the click in order to perform the swap. So because of these disadvantages, Raman Rai is for the most part weaker than Archive Memories and is thus not very playable. In order to build a decent Raman Rai deck, you need to take advantage of the fact that Raman Rai is persistent. Unlike Archive Memories, which is single use, Raman Rai can potentially fire an unlimited number of times, provided you keep it safe on the board. So because of this, Raman Rai needs to be defended. It needs to be played in a deck that can defend assets. So this is where my patron's suggestion, Philip45, came in. To quote Philip45's suggestion, in an ambient controlling the message deck, Raman Rai can be used to recur lots of useful cards such as hard-hitting news, economy, and Mumbat virtual tour over and over and over to put the economic hurt on the runner. So exactly as Philip mentioned, he intends to leverage on Raman Rai in a deck that can protect assets. Controlling the message obviously does so by punishing the runner with a tag should they go to trash Raman Rai. And it takes advantage of the persistence of Raman Rai by recurring those said useful cards over and over again. As most of you might know, Controlling the Message is typically a tempo deck, one where you strive to gain lots of money and or to make the runner as poor as possible. So cards like hard-hitting news, economy cards, and Mumbat virtual tours all contribute to this positive tempo that you are looking for, and Raman Rai allows you to play those cards more than once, which is very helpful. And of course, it is useful in another way because instead of drawing for these cards, for example, if you're looking for your second copy of hard-hitting news, you can simply recur it from the bin instead with Raman Rai. So lots of useful things to come out of Raman Rai in Controlling the Message. But as I was deck building, I started realizing that Raman Rai combos extremely well with a particular card that you already run in most existing Controlling the Message decks. That card is none other than Daily Business Show. These two cards together form an alliance, no pun intended, that is stronger than the sum of its parts. For those of you who are unaware of the rules interactions between these two cards, I'm about to illustrate them with a simple example. Let's assume that we are playing co-op, Controlling the Message, and we have both Daily Business Show and Raman Rai installed in different remotes, and they are both rezzed. We have a hard-hitting news in archives, and we have some cards in R&D and no cards in our hand. So let's say it's our mandatory draw. It's time for us to begin our turn. Normally we would draw one card, but because of Daily Business Show's effects, we add these two effects to the action queue. We need to draw an additional card and then add one of those drawn cards to the bottom of R&D as per Daily Business Show's text box. So let's do that. We're going to take our mandatory draw and draw an additional card of Daily Business Show. Now, because By doing so, by making these card draws, we have met the trigger condition for Ramen Rai's conditional ability. Ramen Rai states, once per turn, when you draw a card, blah 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 blah. So since we just drew cards, we trigger Ramen Rai and trigger a chain reaction where Ramen Rai's ability gets popped, or rather pushed onto the action queue. And because daily business shows effects are not simultaneous, we delay the effect of adding one of the drawn cards to the bottom of R&D. We need to resolve Ramen Rai's effect first because it triggered off drawing the additional card that came from the first part of resolving daily business show. So, what does Ramen Rai do? We can swap operations from hand and archives if we lose a click. So let's say we do that. Let's say we want to swap the exchange of information in our hand with the hard-hitting news in archives. So let's trigger Ramen Rai to do so. And then we proceed on with the action queue to resolve daily business show's final part, which is to add one of the drawn cards to the bottom of R&D. But what were the drawn cards? They have now been displaced. We know for sure that one of the drawn cards are hedge fund, but what's the other? According to the unofficial FAQ for Ramen Rai, the lead developer confirmed that the game knows that the card swapped into archives, the exchange of information that was put in archives, was the card that was drawn earlier by Daily Business Show. So it is still an eligible target to be buried by Daily Business Show. What this means is that while resolving Daily Business Show's second part, we can choose to bury the hedge fund that we drew earlier, or to bury the exchange of information that we drew earlier, even though it's now in archives. So that's very interesting. We can actually put exchange of information on the bottom of R&D with Daily Business Show's second part of its ability. And what does this mean for us? This means that at the end of the day, after the mandatory draw, we gain 2 cards in our hand. We started with no cards in our hand, but suddenly we have 2. And we remove 1 card from archives. The hard-hitting news that was there is no longer. And we remove 1 card from R&D. We drew 2 cards off the top, but put the exchange back at the bottom of the deck, so that's net minus 1 card of R&D. This is a very good trade. If you are familiar with asset spam decks, well, or rather most asset-based decks, you would know that card draw is very important and can often make or break games. So being able to get lots of cards into your hand is a good thing, and being able to do that for a single click alongside your mandatory draw with daily business shown to Ramen Rai is a huge advantage. While doing so, we are making sure not to deplete R&D too much. We lose 1 card off R&D, but that was going to happen anyway because of your mandatory draw. What's most important is that this card draw isn't depleting your R&D faster, because by eating through your deck faster, it means that you're going to draw into more agendas for the runners to steal, which may not be a good thing. By taking this extra card from archives instead of R&D, we are able to get more mileage out of the cards that we played, out of the cards in our deck, and that's a very good thing for a tempo asset deck like CTM. So this is a really wonderful combo and synergizes with everything that CTM has to offer, which is why I think this is a very overlooked combo and one that we can definitely showcase in our successful demo. Oh, and speaking of which, watch out, runner, you're about to get hit by a hard-hitting news. Maybe you thought that I wasn't going to have another hard-hitting news since I had no cards in hand, but thanks to Ramen Rai, being able to recur hard-hitting news from the bin is a huge threat. Okay, so with all that said and done, this is how our deck is going to look like. For those of you who have played any amount of CTM at all, this deck is going to look very, very familiar. All the cards that you've grown to know and love are all in there. Your hard-hitting news, your exchange of informations, the money, the agenda suite, the ice. All of that is very standard. The only parts that have changed are the assets, because instead of running cards like commercial bankers groups, like team sponsorships, instead we are going to be running Jinteki cards to fulfill Ramen Rai's alliance requirement. 3 turtle bags and 3 mental health clinics as economy cards, because economy is important in such a tempo deck. Alright, enough rambling on. This is just a very standard deck. Otherwise, let's head into the game and see what magic we can make out of this very unconventional combo. Now, normally when we play CTM, we attempt to mulligan for big tempo cards early on like Rashida and AR Enhanced Security. But I think my opening hand is acceptable because it has two big money cards in double hedge fund. So that immediately puts the pressure on my opponent because they cannot afford to run knowing that I'm so rich. I might hit them with a hard-hitting news. My mandatory draw just made things even sweeter as I drew into Rashida. Rashida allowed me to the combination of hedge fund Rashida toll booth allows me to defend the Rashida very safely and thus allows me to get the massive draw on turn 2 for a big boost. Now, here we draw into the entire combo already. We have 2 daily business shows, a mental health clinic, and a Ramen Rai. But first, I choose to set up my economy. So instead of setting up the full Ramen Rai combo, we go with mental health clinic first for the drip economy. Money is very important in this matchup because I expect to be raising the toll booth on the remote, and that is really expensive. Now I continue defending R&D here, not just with a Mumbat Virtual Tour, but also with a Turnpike. This will thwart anyone who is attempting to index me. Now we get the big combo of Daily Business Show into Ramen Rai. We draw into Ramen Rai and 15 minutes. Ramen Rai is unique. We don't need more than one copy, so I can easily sacrifice the Ramen Rai that I just drew for the Rashida in the bin. We can Ramen Rai swap these 2 cards. So Rashida goes in my hand, and now I trigger Daily Business Show's second part. I can bury either the 15 minutes I drew with Daily Business Show or, more obviously, the Ramen Rai in archives. Why would I bury an agenda that I can score perfectly well? So I'm going to attempt to score the 15 minutes here, but I also want to get the Rashida trigger. So what I'm going to do is actually to install both 15 minutes and Rashida on the table. I did not think my opponent would actually run the 15 minutes given that they didn't run anything else before, but run they did. Very unfortunate. Thankfully for me, my opponent made the big misplay here. You always sacrifice the 15 minutes to Shadow Net as soon as you can, but my opponent did not see that line of play. So I made it a point on my next turn to immediately put the 15 minutes back in my deck. Can't let my opponent have it. That's a free 9 credits if they use 15 minutes to power up ShadowNet to get a sure gamble. So we dodged a big bullet there because if they got the 9 credits from sure gamble, I don't think I'll be able to win the game. They would be so rich that they can afford to trash my entire board and still have spare change left over to contest my remote. Now my opponent continue checking my remotes. All they see are money cards like Pet Campaign. They are now going to dismantle my entire Ramen Rai combo, my entire draw and filtering combo, getting rid of both Ramen Rai and Daily Business Show. But no worries, there's still a couple more where they came from. Daily Business Show in hand. And don't forget the Ramen Rai that I buried earlier into R&D with the other Ramen Rai. Well, it has just been shuffled randomly in the deck because don't forget we shuffled 15 minutes into R&D after that. So Ramen Rai is no longer at the bottom of the deck. We could potentially draw it again. Now I mandatory draw into Project Build. That is the signal to begin scoring agendas. With no breakers installed, I'm pretty confident my opponent will not contest server 1, so we are going to get the build scored while distracting our opponent with a second copy of Daily Business Show that they are forced to trash. Down to 6 credits, I realized this is a very good opportunity to hit my opponent with a hard-hitting news. I forget the rest pair campaign here, minor problem, I'm on 25 credits. So do I score the build here or do I go in for the hard-hitting news? I think I made a misplay here. The correct line of play would be to double advance the build in the remote and then hard-hitting news. Thereafter, I'll be able to score the project build for 3 points instead of 2. This is quite a big mistake. Because by landing a hard-hitting news immediately after double advancing the build, my opponent cannot afford to run server 1 to contest the build. They would end their turn tagged. That's not good for them. So I definitely should have done that instead of attempting to draw 2 cards manually. Not sure. I was trying to look for assets to compensate for the fact that my opponent was contesting my board. But in hindsight, scoring agenda points was more important given that my opponent was still in the window where they had no breakers out. I know they're Carbonessa Wu, they can easily get my remote, but that's not the point. Alright, we scored a build here. Simple turn, but that gives our opponent an additional turn to continue setting up, during which they just install more caches onto the table, as well as a Harbinger. You can probably start guessing what sort of restricted card my opponent is on. Meanwhile, we do have a Global Food in our hand. That is something we will definitely look to score in the coming turn. I'm looking at my hand, I'm like, okay, let's try to score this. Install double advance. I don't think you can contest this. With a toll booth there, I'm feeling pretty good about myself. You would have to have a stim hack in your hand in order to even think of contesting the food. So they drop a lady. I see they have no SMC on the table, no Guardian Blade. I knew this was my agenda for the taking. So Toll Booth stops them cold, ends them on only 2 credits, and without any agendas in the score area, they can't get money for ShadowNet either. My opponent is struggling here as I go up to 5 points. But they are definitely assembling the board, so this is definitely cause for concern. We noticed that their deck is fairly interesting. They are running Reaver Shop deck. So not only when they trash their cards do they get an additional card draw, when they trash my cards, they also get card draw. So all this while, they have been trashing my Raman Rhyme, my Daily Business Show. Even though they have been losing credits, they have been gaining cards. They are drawing through the deck at a reasonable speed, and now more caches along the way. It should be noted that at this point, having the economy advantage isn't that good for me anymore. Partially because I spend a lot of said economy advantage on scoring agendas, but more importantly because my opponent is running misdirection, as most shapers should. It just isn't really worth it to land hard-hitting users anymore. Now, I continue going for the total backs. The good news is I'm gaining money. The bad news is I'm fielding my opponent's card draw that much more, thanks to their ability to draw with Astrolabe, another really good card against CTM. We jammed the Quantum Predictive Model into server 1, hoping to score it. This would make my life a lot easier because it means that I only need to score one more 1-pointer before winning the game, assuming I get this Quantum Predictive Model scored. So I'm threatening match point here. The card in server 1 could very well be a Project Build, so my opponent is forced to run it. So they first drop a Guardian Blade from their hand, must have been drawn by the Astrolabe, and then they swoop in for the kill. Alright, I guess this is going to be theirs. Not much I can do about this. So, Toll Booth, tax, everything, they go down to 0 credits, but they do steal the 6 agenda point from me. And then I started looking at the board with, a very concerned look. Because, yes, they do have ShadowNet, and you bet they're going to forfeit that Quantum Kitty to ShadowNet next turn for a big cash boost. Normally, what you do at this stage as CTM is that you keep jamming cards into server 1 until you win the game. You can't really do that against Carbonessa Wu with ShadowNet, because every time they steal an agenda, they get 9 credits with which to run your server again. So that's not looking good for me. Right? After they sack the kitty, they are now on a healthy 11 credits, which means, as I said, they can maintain the remote lock, run my server 1 again. This time it's not an agenda. Unfortunately, it's a Mumbat Virtual Tour that they are 1 credit short of trashing. I would have forced them to trash it if they had 1 more credit, but they did not. Very nice play by my opponent to end that run on 4 credits exactly. So now they know what's in the remote, they know what's about to hit them. Let's see if I can score the final build for the win. I don't have the powerful card draw engine anymore because my opponent has been diligently breaking down my Daily Business Shows, so I'm just getting crap cards at this point. I need to find a 3 advanceable agenda to put in the remote, or some sort of asset that lures them into the remote. But first, I'm going to get a Raman Ride trigger, swapping the exchange of information I just drew with a hard-hitting news in the bin. I figured this is an okay time to land a hard-hitting news. If I can't jam anything to server 1, the least I can do is to force them to lose 2 clicks by using misdirection and spend 4 credits. Every credit counts at this stage because they found the Aesop's pawn shop finally, so they're getting 3 free credits every turn with which to lock my remote. That is not acceptable. So yeah, force them to lose some tempo there. I'm going down pretty low in credits, but I don't really care because I have 2 total backs and a Daily Business Show and a pack campaign and a mental health clinic running, so money is not a concern. We put something in server 1 and we challenge them to get it at only 3 credits to their name. I think it's going to be pretty hard. I'm going to make it even harder this time by putting an additional Turnpike on the remote. Turnpike and Enigma, not that big of a difference. I prefer the Turnpike here simply because reasons. It doesn't really matter. It's 1 cheaper to res, I guess. The most important thing is that after resing it, I'm on 3 credits, so I can still score an agenda here. Not that it matters because I have drip economy ticking down, but anyway, my opponent jacks out after encountering the Turnpike because they figured that they don't have enough money to actually get through the entire server. The Toll Booth is doing a lot of work here. As a one-off ice, it is the only big ice in my deck, but is paying off dividends against a remote lock shaper here. Enough, it is taxing enough to deter runs and actually allows me to push this agenda under their nose and scoring it to get me to real match points, 6 agenda points. That's when things start getting really dicey for my opponent, because they would have to worry about a fast advance 15 minutes in addition to the normal stuff. Oh wait, no, they are going for my agenda. No, I believe that was a project build which would have won me the game. Yeah, oh dear. Yeah, that was a project build that would have won me the game. Scratch what I said earlier. I thought they wouldn't be able to contest this after jacking out, but it turns out that by floating a tag, they could. So now they're tagged, but I can't take advantage of it. Close accounts doesn't matter, exchange of information doesn't matter. I draw into a 15 minutes here, but I can't score it yet, so I just put it in server 1. Maybe I get to score it another time. Or do I? I don't know. It's a very tricky situation here. What if they go tag me? I could use the 15 minutes if they go tag me. Then an exchange of information would just win me the game. So I'm going to try to Rashida here. Rashida with Raman Rai is really interesting. It can potentially provide some very powerful swaps. Because you're drawing so many cards at once, you get a lot of choices. But my opponent decides to go tag me and index my R&D. Okay, things are looking dicey. I know there are a lot of agendas in my hand. Both of the cards in my hand are agendas, but there are still quite a few agendas in R&D unaccounted for, and it's running pretty thin at this point. So my opponent takes 3 credits and ends the turn. No agendas in R&D. Okay, we take those. We fire Rashida, expecting not to see any agendas on R&D at all. Okay, let's see what we draw. There is an agenda. There's an ARES Enhanced Security. Interesting. My opponent gave me 2 AR Enhanced Securities. What the heck? We take those, I guess. So I put an Enhanced Security in a more secure server. The remote is nigh impenetrable for my opponent. Well, I guess they could get it, but it's only 1 agenda, and that just exposes them to a lot more danger. Right, so they start running my hand here and dropping a turning wheel as well, stealing a bunch of agendas along the way. Right, so I score the AR Enhanced Security here. Now, you note that there is a Raman Rai on the table. What I should have done earlier on the Rashida draw was that I should have exchanged the hard-hitting news in my hand, which is now no longer really relevant, for the exchange of information in the bin. Don't forget, I put the exchange of information in the bin earlier, and that could have been really helpful. It would put me in a state whereby, given my opponent is floating tags, I would be able to then exchange my AR Enhanced Security for a big agenda on their side to close out the game using a single click. Well, it doesn't matter in the end, because I did not have the time to do so. My opponent, with indexing, managed to win the game before I could. So there you go. Even though we lost this game, it was a very close shave and could have easily gone either way. Moreover, I was more than pleased that Raman Rai actually did something this game. I know it sounds like a low bar to clear, but honestly, given that archive memories trumps Raman Rai 90% of the time, it's very refreshing to see Raman Rai actually work. We did 2 swaps this game, and they were both good swaps. The first was swapping a duplicate Raman Rai for Rashida. You can never complain when you get extra Rashidas as CTM. It's always nice to have those extra draw and extra money. And one really nice thing to know about Rashida is that because its effect causes it to trash itself. After firing Rashida, it goes in a bin. This means that as long as you're playing 3 copies of Rashida in your deck, you can fairly reliably start stocking archives up with assets in addition to operations. Typically, in the early to mid game, you only have operations in your bin because, you're playing cards like Hedge Fund and IPO. So those are in the bin, but assets and upgrades, not so, unless your opponent is very proactive with trashing your cards. So Raman Rai is actually not very good in the early to mid game simply because there are no cards in the bin to swap. But with Rashida, Raman Rai becomes that much better. We also saw how we exchanged an exchange of information that we drew for a hard-hitting news in the bin so that we could land it on our opponent. What Raman Rai does in this case is to allow you to manipulate the cards in your hand and those in archives, such that The cards most useful to you right now are the cards that will go into your hand, while those not so useful to you now but could be useful later go in the bin, so that they can be swapped at a later time. As a recursion card, Raman offers that opportunity, and I could have capitalized on it. I just chose not to pull the exchange back to my hand when I could have later on. Finally, as an asset, Raman has its advantages in a CTM deck. Of course, my opponent was forced to trash one of those that incurred them a tempo loss, which is always nice in a tempo deck. All in all, as I said, I did not think I would end up showcasing this card because it's one of those underpowered cards, but Philip45 made that glorious suggestion to use it in CTM and gave me a very compelling reason and a very compelling deck archetype. And it worked. It totally worked. So thank you very much, Philip45. These are the sorts of submissions I'm looking for. Fantastic submissions, and it didn't take me too many games at all to get a successful demo out. I would also like to highlight Philip45's other suggestion that they made alongside Raman, which was Exodidae. Exodidae? Yeah, Exodidae. I probably won't do a demo on this, but if I have time in the future, maybe I could. I'm just gonna get this out here in case I don't cover Exodidae, because I think Philip45 put a lot of effort into writing up their entry, and it would be such a waste if I didn't at least showcase what Philip45 wrote about it. Exodidae becomes a lot more useful now that Kitara Cycle is out, simply because there were so many credit denial cards introduced in the Kitara Cycle. We got the Siphon Replacement and Diversion of Funds, of course, but we also got the powerful Criminal Current in Corporate Grant. This means that potentially every turn you can force the Corp to lose one while you gain one. And above that, there are still cards like Amina and System Outage. Very, very interesting. Lots of cards on both the Criminal and Anarch side to leverage on. So yeah, definitely worth revisiting this otherwise unheard of virus from the Lunar Cycle. Back then it didn't have too many synergies, but now with the new Kitara Cycle and the new criminal archetypes that are out, you could see Exodidae making an entrance in 419 decks, because these criminal cards, man, they're pretty strong. Right, that's all we have for today. Thanks everyone for watching, and thanks to Philip45 once more for the wonderful suggestions. In the meantime, happy night running. Goodbye.